I was moving cattle when 3 sand trucks roared down my driveway and backed straight up to my swimming pool. By the time I reached them, 20 tons of sand were thundering into my crystal-clear water like a dirty avalanche. That pool was everything to my daughter. Her weekend cannonballs, friends laughing till sunset, the only thing that still brought her home. Now it was buried. Beverly Hartwell from the HOA stood there smirking with her clipboard.
Health violation. Standing water breeds mosquitoes.
My pool was spotless.
Nothing personal, Mr. Briggs.
Nothing personal. She just destroyed my family's sanctuary. But Beverly made one mistake. Her precious golf course sits on my agricultural land, and I have the legal right to spread manure on it. So on tournament day, rich golfers in white uniforms, TV cameras rolling, the trucks arrived. What happened next made national news. Ever been bullied by someone with a clipboard? This is how you fight back. I never wanted to be at war with my neighbors. I'm Clayton Briggs, 52 years old, and I'd been working the same 300 acres outside Cedar Heights for over 20 years, long before the developers showed up with their grand plans for luxury living. My weathered hands and sun-beaten face tell the story of a man who'd earned every dollar through honest work, raising Black Angus cattle and running a small but profitable manure supply business for local organic farms. My ranch house sits on a gentle hill overlooking what used to be open pasture. Now, instead of endless Texas sky, my kitchen window frames the emerald fairways of Oakwood Estates golf course. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd built their slice of paradise right next to the working ranch that made their land so charmingly rural in the sales brochures. My pride and joy wasn't my prize bull or my restored 1987 Ford pickup. It was the kidney-shaped swimming pool behind my house, complete with a small waterfall feature and underwater lighting. I'd built it myself 3 summers ago, every tile laid by hand, every pipe fitted with the same precision I brought to fixing cattle gates. The pool wasn't just for show. It was my sanctuary after 16-hour days. And more importantly, it was the one thing that still brought my 19-year-old daughter Sarah back home on weekends. Since the divorce 2 years ago, Sarah had made it clear she preferred her mother's air-conditioned apartment in Dallas to the dust and cow smell of the ranch. But something about floating in that pool under the wide Texas sky still called to her. Those weekend visits, watching her splash around like she was 12 again, were worth more to me than my entire herd. The trouble started when Beverly Hartwell moved into the biggest house on the golf course's 18th fairway. Beverly was what you might charitably call particular about her surroundings. She'd made her money in Houston real estate before retiring to Cedar Heights, and she brought with her the unshakable belief that everything around her should meet her exacting standards. Within 6 months of arrival, Beverly had maneuvered herself onto the HOA board. Within 8 months, she was president. Her first order of business was aesthetic improvement, which apparently meant making sure nothing visible from the golf course offended her sensibilities. The rusty farm equipment had to go, the chickens needed better housing, and that garish blue swimming pool with its tacky waterfall, completely inappropriate for a community of their caliber. I first heard about Beverly's concerns through a certified letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. The thick cream-colored envelope bore the gold-embossed logo of Oakwood Estates HOA. Inside, 3 pages of legal jargon boiled down to one simple message. My pool was an aesthetic violation that materially impacted property values and needed to be removed or significantly modified within 30 days. The letter was signed with Beverly's flourishing signature and included helpful suggestions for ranch-appropriate water features like stock tanks or utilitarian irrigation ponds. The smell of fresh ink and expensive paper couldn't mask the underlying stench of entitlement. I read the letter twice, then set it down next to my coffee cup with the deliberate care of a man containing his temper. Through the window, I could see golfers teeing off on the 18th hole, their bright polo shirts and gleaming carts, a stark contrast to my dusty pasture. One of them pointed toward my pool and said something that made his partner laugh. That evening, when Sarah called for our weekly check-in, I mentioned the letter. Her response was immediate and fierce. "They want to take away our pool? Dad, that's the only good thing about coming home anymore." I stared out at the pool's underwater lights dancing against the gathering dusk. The waterfall trickled peacefully, a sound that had helped me sleep through countless worry-filled nights about cattle prices and mortgage payments. Beverly Hartwell had just declared war on the wrong rancher. The next morning brought the kind of crisp March air that made me grateful to be working outdoors instead of trapped in some Houston high-rise like Beverly Hartwell used to be. I was checking the fence line that separated my pasture from the golf course when I spotted her marching across the perfectly manicured grass, clipboard in hand and determination in every step. Beverly wore the uniform of suburban authority, pressed khakis, a spotless white polo shirt, and sneakers so white they practically glowed. Her silver hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it could have been installed with a torque wrench. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of will and expensive lawyers. "Mr. Briggs," she called out, her voice carrying that particular pitch that mothers use when they're about to ground their teenagers. "I need to speak with you about your situation." I straightened up from the fence post I'd been examining, my 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the property line. The morning sun caught the silver stubble on my jaw and the laugh lines around my eyes, lines earned from 20 years of dealing with stubborn cattle and even more stubborn neighbors. "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell. If this is about the letter, I already told you my answer. Pool stays." Beverly's smile was the kind that real estate agents perfect after years of selling overpriced houses to nervous buyers. "Mr. Briggs, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The HOA board isn't trying to be difficult. We're simply maintaining community standards that protect everyone's investment." She gestured toward the golf course with the sweeping motion of someone presenting a particularly impressive property listing. "Our residents paid premium prices for their view of this beautiful course. Your installation creates an unfortunate visual disruption." I followed her gaze to where 3 golfers were lining up their shots on the 18th tee. One of them, a red-faced man in plaid shorts, was indeed pointing toward my pool and shaking his head with theatrical disgust. The irony that these same folks drove out from Dallas every weekend to escape the city and enjoy my rural setting wasn't lost on me. "Funny thing about that view," I said, hooking my thumbs in my belt loops. "My family's been looking at this land since 1987. Your golf course is the visual disruption around here." Beverly's practiced smile flickered like a fluorescent bulb about to burn out. She consulted her clipboard with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. "Mr. Briggs, I've done my research. Your property is subject to the same aesthetic covenants as the rest of Cedar Heights." "Is that so?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd taken the night before. "Might want to check that research again." I showed her the screen, which displayed a scan of my original property deed from 1987, 15 years before the first shovel had broken ground on Oakwood Estates. The document clearly showed my ranch as agricultural land exempt from future residential covenants. Beverly squinted at the phone screen, her confident expression melting like ice cream on hot asphalt. The legal implications were clear even to someone without a law degree. My ranch predated the HOA by more than a decade, which meant their rules didn't apply to my property. But Beverly Hartwell hadn't clawed her way to the top of Houston's cutthroat real estate market by giving up at the first sign of legal complications. She straightened her shoulders and deployed what I would later describe to Sarah as her final boss voice. "Property law is more complex than a simple deed, Mr. Briggs. The HOA represents the collective interests of over 200 homeowners. I'm sure once you consider the broader community impact, you'll see reason." I pocketed my phone and picked up my fence tool with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've been reasonable for 6 months, while your golf course sprinklers have been flooding my cattle pasture. Every morning I wake up to soggy ground because your irrigation system is poorly designed and overwatered." That's completely different," Beverly sputtered. "Different how? Your golf course maintenance impacts my agricultural operation. My pool impacts your view. Difference is, one of us has actual legal standing." The mini twist came in Beverly's response. Instead of backing down or negotiating, she pulled out her own phone and started taking pictures of my property. Not just the pool, but my cattle feeders, the old barn, even my perfectly legal manure pile that I used for my fertilizer business. "If you want to play property law games, Mr. Briggs, I've been in real estate for 30 years. I know every trick in the book." Her voice carried the cold precision of someone shifting into attack mode. "Agricultural exemptions have limitations. Let's see how your farming operation holds up under county inspection." As she marched back toward the golf course, her white sneakers clicking against the cart path like a countdown timer, I realized I'd just witnessed my neighborly dispute transform into something much more serious. Beverly Hartwell had just threatened to use the county regulatory system as her personal weapon. That evening, I called my insurance agent to ask about agricultural liability coverage. Something told me I was going to need it. True to her word, Beverly Hartwell unleashed the full fury of bureaucratic warfare within a week. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a white county truck pulling up my gravel driveway at 7 in the morning, its diesel engine rumbling like distant thunder. The smell of coffee and bacon from my kitchen mingled with the exhaust fumes as Inspector Rodriguez stepped out, clipboard already in hand. "Mr. Briggs, I'm here about a complaint regarding agricultural operations, specifically alleged violations of county livestock ordinances and waste management protocols." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and studied the inspector's face. Rodriguez had the weathered look of someone who'd spent years dealing with both legitimate violations and petty neighbor disputes. His expression suggested he already suspected which category this fell into. "What kind of violations are we talking about?" Rodriguez consulted his paperwork with the weary precision of a man who'd rather be doing anything else at 7 in the morning. Anonymous complaint alleges improper manure storage, inadequate livestock housing, and potential groundwater contamination from agricultural runoff. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a hay knife. My manure operation was actually better organized than most commercial fertilizer companies. I'd built covered storage areas, proper drainage systems, and maintained detailed records for my organic certification. Meanwhile, the golf course's chemical fertilizers and pesticides were running off into the same groundwater system every time their sprinklers came on. "Let me grab my boots and I'll show you around," I said, already knowing how this inspection would end. We spent 2 hours walking the property. Rodriguez examined my covered manure storage areas, tested the water quality in my stock tanks, and reviewed 3 years' worth of agricultural records. His growing confusion was evident as he checked item after item off his violation list, finding everything in perfect compliance. "Mr. Briggs, I've got to ask, do you have any idea who might have filed this complaint?" I gestured toward the golf course where Beverly's house sat prominently on the 18th fairway. "Might have something to do with a disagreement about property aesthetics." Rodriguez followed my gaze and let out a long sigh. "Ah, one of those." He'd clearly dealt with HOA warfare before. "Well, your operation is cleaner than most commercial dairies I inspect. Whoever called this in either has no idea what they're looking at or has other motivations." But Beverly's real masterstroke came 3 days later, delivered via another certified letter. This time, the envelope bore the official seal of the county tax assessor's office. My heart sank as I read the contents. My property was being reclassified from agricultural to residential use, which would triple my annual tax bill from $3,200 to nearly $10,000. The letter cited evidence of non-agricultural activities, including recreational swimming facilities, inconsistent with working farm designation. Attached was a series of photographs, the same ones Beverly had taken during our fence line confrontation, now presented as evidence to county officials. My hands shook slightly as I calculated the numbers. An extra $7,000 a year would force me to sell cattle just to pay taxes. It was a death sentence for a small rancher already struggling with drought conditions and rising feed costs. That evening, I drove into town to visit my old friend Jake Morrison, who'd been practicing agricultural law in Cedar Heights for 40 years. Jake's office still smelled like leather and old books, a comforting contrast to the sterile efficiency of HOA correspondence. "Clayton, this is dirty pool, even by HOA standards," Jake said after reviewing the tax reassessment notice. "But here's something your neighbor might not know about Texas agricultural exemptions." Jake pulled out a thick volume of state agricultural codes and flipped to a bookmarked section. Agricultural exemption doesn't require exclusive agricultural use. You can have recreational facilities on agricultural land as long as the primary use remains farming. Your swimming pool doesn't disqualify your exemption any more than a farmhouse does. The knowledge nugget hit me like a cattle prod. Texas Property Tax Code Section 23.51 allows incidental recreational use on agricultural land without affecting exemption status. Translation: Beverly's tax attack was built on quicksand. "But here's the twist," Jake continued, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver good news. Filing a fraudulent tax challenge is a third-degree felony in Texas. If we can prove Mrs. Hartwell knowingly submitted false information. I felt the first stirrings of hope since this whole mess started. Beverly had just made a crucial tactical error. Instead of sticking to HOA covenant disputes, she'd ventured into criminal territory by attempting to manipulate the tax system. Jake, what would you need to prove fraud? Documentation that she knew the agricultural exemption was legitimate but filed the challenge anyway. Got any recordings of your conversations? I thought about my phone's voice memo app, which had been running during our fence line confrontation. Beverly's own words about playing property law games might just come back to haunt her. The mini twist was delicious in its simplicity. Beverly's escalation had given me the legal ammunition I needed to fight back. The August heat was brutal that summer, the kind that made the air shimmer like water over the asphalt. I'd been up since 5 a.m. moving cattle to the back pasture when I heard the rumble of heavy trucks coming down my driveway. Not the familiar diesel purr of a feed delivery, but something bigger, meaner. I walked around the side of my house and stopped dead in my tracks. 3 sand trucks were backing up to my swimming pool, their hydraulic whines cutting through the morning air like rusty saw blades. The lead truck bore the logo of Hartwell Construction, Beverly's son's company, apparently recruited for this particular mission. Standing beside the trucks with a clipboard and a satisfied smile was Beverly herself, dressed in her standard-issue HOA battle uniform. Next to her stood a nervous-looking man in a wrinkled suit who kept mopping his forehead with a handkerchief despite the early hour. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice carried across the yard with the authority of someone who'd spent decades calling cattle across open pasture. Beverly looked up from her clipboard with the expression of someone delivering particularly satisfying news. "Mr. Briggs, this is County Health Inspector Williams. We're here to address a public health emergency." Inspector Williams stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this drama. "Sir, we received reports of standing water creating mosquito breeding conditions. State health code requires immediate remediation when vector control measures fail." I stared at my pristine pool, its crystal clear water sparkling in the morning sun. The chlorine levels were perfectly balanced, the filtration system hummed quietly, and the only insects in sight were the beneficial dragonflies that hunted mosquitoes over the surface. "What mosquitoes? This pool is cleaner than most municipal water supplies." Beverly's smile could have powered the county courthouse. "Mr. Briggs, you've been cited for multiple health violations over the past 2 months. Failure to respond to county notices requires immediate action under emergency protocols." She handed me a stack of violation notices I'd never seen before, each one supposedly sent to my address, each one marked as delivered by certified mail, none of which I'd actually received. The paper trail was immaculate: mosquito breeding complaints, water quality concerns, even alleged reports of stagnant conditions attracting rodents. The mini twist was devastating in its simplicity. Beverly had been filing false health complaints under different names, residents who probably had no idea their identities were being used, and having the notices delivered to a non-existent address. When I failed to respond, the county was legally required to take emergency action. "This is fraud," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "This is public health," Beverly replied. "Inspector Williams, please proceed with remediation." What happened next would be burned into my memory forever. The first truck tilted its bed and 20 tons of construction sand began pouring into my pool like a brown waterfall of destruction. The sound was indescribable, part avalanche, part industrial accident, part deliberate cruelty. My carefully maintained blue oasis disappeared under a mountain of gritty beige sand that turned the water into something resembling chocolate milk. The pool pump, still gamely trying to circulate water, made increasingly desperate gurgling sounds before giving up with a mechanical death rattle. The underwater lights flickered once and went dark. The little waterfall feature that had provided such peaceful background noise vanished under the relentless cascade of sand. I watched $15,000 of my life's work disappear in 30 minutes. More than that, I watched the one thing that still brought my daughter home on weekends get buried under a pile of bureaucratic spite and regulatory abuse. When the last grain of sand settled, Inspector Williams cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, you'll receive remediation instructions within 5 business days. The area must remain undisturbed until County Environmental Services can assess contamination levels." Beverly signed the completion paperwork with a flourish, her signature bold and satisfied. Mr. Briggs, this could all have been avoided if you'd simply been willing to work with the community. Sometimes we have to learn lessons the hard way. As the trucks rumbled away, leaving 20 tons of sand where my pool used to be, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but the cold, calculating fury of someone pushed past their breaking point. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. When she answered, I could hear the excitement in her voice as she asked about weekend plans. The silence stretched long after I explained what had happened. They killed our pool? Her voice was small, hurt in a way that cut deeper than any property damage. Yeah, honey, they killed it. What are you going to do, Dad? I stared at the sand pile that had once been our sanctuary, then shifted my gaze to the golf course where tiny figures in bright clothing were already teeing off for another perfect day in paradise. I'm going to teach them about agricultural waste management, I said quietly, the hard way. That evening, I made 3 phone calls. One to Jake Morrison about filing criminal charges, one to my insurance company about malicious property damage, and one to every dairy farmer within 50 miles who needed somewhere to dump excess manure. The revelation came from the most unlikely source, my 78-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Juliet, who lived in the small farmhouse on the other side of the golf course. She knocked on my door 3 days after the sand incident, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the determined expression of someone with important news to share. Clayton, dear, I found something you need to see. Her voice carried the slight tremor of age, but the steel of someone who'd survived the Great Depression and wasn't easily intimidated by neighborhood bullies. She spread the contents of the envelope across my kitchen table, photocopies of old land surveys, property deeds, and a yellow document marked Easement Agreement, 1963. The papers smelled like attic dust and old ink, the kind of documents that hold secrets for decades until the right person knows where to look. My late husband was the county surveyor when they first planned this development, Mrs. Juliet explained, adjusting her reading glasses. Before he passed, he told me to keep these papers safe, said they might matter someday when the developers got too big for their britches. I studied the documents with growing amazement. The original 1963 easement agreement was clear as daylight. The land that now housed Oakwood Estates Golf Course was designated as agricultural easement territory, with specific provisions for livestock waste application and agricultural runoff management. The knowledge nugget was pure gold buried in legal language. Agricultural easements in Texas grant permanent rights to traditional farming practices, including manure application, regardless of subsequent land development. Translation: I had the legal right to spread fertilizer on the golf course property that my family's easement predated by 4 decades. Mrs. Juliet, are you telling me I can legally dump manure on their golf course? The elderly woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. Not just legally, dear. The easement specifically requires the golf course to accommodate reasonable agricultural activities from adjacent properties. Your father signed the original agreement as a condition of allowing the development to proceed. My hands shook as I read the fine print. The easement wasn't just a relic. It was a legally binding contract that gave me sweeping rights to use the golf course property for agricultural purposes. Beverly's precious manicured greens sat on land that was still, technically and legally, designated for farming activities. The document included a map showing the exact boundaries of the easement, which covered not just the fairways but the clubhouse parking lot and even Beverly's backyard. Every property owner in Oakwood Estates had signed agreements acknowledging the agricultural easement when they purchased their homes. Agreements that Beverly, as HOA president, should have been well aware of. There's more, Mrs. Juliet said, pulling out another document. This is the environmental impact assessment from 1995 when they expanded the golf course. Look at section 12. I read the highlighted passage twice to make sure I understood it correctly. The golf course had been built with the understanding that periodic agricultural activities would continue on the property. The environmental assessment specifically accounted for seasonal organic fertilizer application as part of the land management plan. In other words, the golf course had been designed and permitted with the expectation that someone like me might need to spread manure on it. The county had not only approved such activities, they'd required the golf course to accommodate them as a condition of the building permits. Mrs. Juliet, why are you showing me this now? The old woman's face hardened with a resolve that reminded me of my own grandmother. Because that Hartwell woman came to my house last week demanding I support her campaign to have your ranch declared a nuisance. She threatened to have my chickens declared a health violation if I didn't sign her petition. She threatened you? Picked the wrong old lady to intimidate, I'm afraid. My husband didn't save these papers for 50 years just to watch some carpetbagger bully our neighbors. I stared at the easement agreement, feeling the balance of power shift beneath my feet like tectonic plates realigning. Beverly had just gone from neighborhood nuisance to trespasser on agricultural land. The law wasn't just on my side, it was actively in my favor. I spread the easement documents across my kitchen table like a general planning a military campaign. The morning sun slanted through my window, illuminating the yellowed papers that would transform me from victim to victor. But having the legal right to dump manure on a golf course was one thing. Executing it properly was another matter entirely. My first call was to Jake Morrison, who let out a low whistle when I read him the easement language over the phone. Clayton, this is the agricultural equivalent of finding oil in your backyard. That easement gives you rights most farmers would kill for. Jake explained the legal technicalities in terms even a rancher could love. As long as my activities qualified as reasonable agricultural practices, the golf course couldn't stop me. Manure application was not only reasonable, it was specifically mentioned in the original agreement as an expected activity. Here's the beauty of it, Jake continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone about to deliver winning lottery numbers. Beverly's been so busy threatening you with county inspectors, she never bothered to check what county records said about her own property. Agricultural easements in Texas are public record. She could have looked this up any time in the past 6 months. The knowledge nugget crystallized perfectly. Texas Property Code Section 21.012 makes agricultural easements enforceable against all subsequent property owners, regardless of their knowledge or consent. Translation: ignorance of agricultural rights isn't a legal defense when you buy property with existing easements. My next call was to Tommy Rodriguez, who ran the biggest dairy operation in the county. Tommy's voice brightened considerably when I explained my situation. Brother, you're talking my language. I've got 40 tons of fresh cow manure that needs to go somewhere this weekend, and my usual fields are saturated from last week's rain. You're offering me free disposal on your easement land? The economics were beautiful in their simplicity. Tommy would normally pay $200 per load to haul manure to approved disposal sites. I was offering him free dumping on premium land that happened to be shaped like a golf course. It was a win-win situation that would save Tommy money while solving my revenge problem. What time do you need it delivered? Tommy asked. Saturday morning, early. I want it spread before the weekend golfers show up. I spent Thursday evening studying the golf course layout like a quarterback reviewing game film. I knew every hole from my morning walks along the property line, but now I saw it through different eyes. The 18th green, where Beverly's house overlooked the course, would be the primary target. The clubhouse area, where the HOA board held their monthly meetings, deserved special attention too. The beauty of my plan lay in its agricultural legitimacy. I wasn't vandalizing property. I was exercising my legal rights to apply organic fertilizer to agricultural land. The fact that said land happened to be currently configured as a golf course was simply an unfortunate coincidence for the people who'd tried to bury my pool under 20 tons of sand. Friday morning brought a call from Sarah, who'd driven down from Dallas after hearing about the pool disaster. Her voice carried a mixture of outrage and curiosity that reminded me of her mother at that age. Dad, Mom says you're planning some kind of crazy revenge scheme. Please tell me you're not going to do anything illegal. I looked out at the sand pile where our pool used to be, then shifted my gaze to the pristine golf course where Beverly was already out for her morning walk. Honey, what I'm planning is completely legal. Agricultural land use as defined by state easement law. That doesn't sound like you, Dad. You usually just grumble and fix fence posts when people make you mad. Well, this time they made me more than mad. They hurt you too. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried a note of steel I'd never heard before. What time do you need me there Saturday morning? Sarah, you don't need to. Dad, that pool was the only good thing about coming home. If you're going to make them pay for destroying it, I want to help. I felt my chest tighten with something between pride and worry. My daughter had inherited more than my stubborn streak. She'd inherited my sense of justice, too. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, with the kind of crisp air that made everything seem possible. I was up at 5, checking and rechecking my preparations. The easement documents were filed with the county clerk. Tommy's trucks were fueled and ready. Most importantly, I had invited Mrs. Juliet to witness the agricultural activities, along with 2 other neighbors who'd been bullied by Beverly's increasingly aggressive HOA tactics. As the sun rose over Cedar Heights, painting the golf course in shades of gold and green, I pulled on my lucky boots and headed out to meet the trucks. It was time to teach Beverly Hartwell about the difference between suburban privilege and agricultural rights. The smell of diesel engines and fresh manure filled the morning air like the perfume of justice. Beverly Hartwell's desperation became apparent on the Thursday before my planned agricultural activities. She arrived at my front door at 8 in the morning, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who had the predatory look of attorneys billing by the hour. The trio marched up my gravel driveway with the coordinated precision of a SWAT team serving a warrant. "Mr. Briggs," Beverly announced before I could even say good morning, "I'm here with legal representation to discuss your recent threats against Oakwood Estates property." I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug in hand, and studied the legal delegation. The lawyers clutched briefcases like shields and had the pale complexion of people who spent their lives in climate-controlled offices. One of them kept glancing nervously at my cattle, as if the Black Angus might charge at any moment. "Don't recall making any threats," I said mildly. "Just mentioned some agricultural activities I might need to conduct on my easement land." And the lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and a tie that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, stepped forward with practiced authority. "Mr. Briggs, I'm Richard Sterling from Sterling & Associates. Mrs. Hartwell has retained our firm to address your alleged claims regarding agricultural easements on golf course property." I sipped my coffee and waited. I'd learned from years of cattle trading that sometimes the best negotiating strategy was simply letting the other side talk themselves into a corner. Sterling opened his briefcase with theatrical flourish and produced a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. "These are cease and desist orders preventing any unauthorized activities on Oakwood Estates property. Additionally, we have injunctive relief paperwork ready to file if you proceed with any agricultural activities." The word agricultural dripped from Sterling's mouth like something distasteful he'd accidentally swallowed. Clearly, the attorney had spent his career dealing with corporate mergers and real estate deals, not Texas easement law. I set down my coffee mug and pulled out my own documents, the original 1963 easement agreement and the county clerk's certification stamp I'd obtained the day before. "Mr. Sterling, before you file anything, you might want to review these." Sterling's confident expression flickered as he examined the easement papers. His face went through several interesting color changes as he read the agricultural rights language, finally settling on a pale shade that matched his expensive shirt. This appears to be legitimate," Sterling admitted, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering bad news to a client who definitely didn't want to hear it. Beverly snatched the papers from his hands, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the documents like angry castanets. "That's impossible. I've reviewed every covenant and restriction for this property. There's nothing about agricultural anything." "Ma'am," I said patiently, "agricultural easements predate your covenants by 40 years. State law makes them superior to any subsequent property restrictions." The mini twist came in Beverly's desperate response. Instead of accepting legal reality, she pulled out her phone and made a call that I could hear clearly in the morning air. "Commissioner Wallace, this is Beverly Hartwell. I need that emergency county meeting we discussed." "Yes, today. I don't care what the agenda says, this is about public health and safety." She hung up and faced me with renewed confidence. "Mr. Briggs, I've just called an emergency county commissioners meeting for this afternoon. We're going to have your so-called easement declared invalid based on changed land use conditions." Sterling looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive briefcase. "Mrs. Hartwell, I should advise you that agricultural easements in Texas are extremely difficult to invalidate. The legal precedent," Beverly interrupted, "is that this community has invested millions of dollars in property improvements. No county commissioner is going to side with one rancher against 200 homeowners." I felt a grim satisfaction watching Beverly double down on a losing strategy. She was about to learn the difference between political influence and legal rights, the hard way. "Mrs. Hartwell, you're certainly welcome to try, but you should know that I've already filed my agricultural activity notice with the county clerk. Under Texas law, I have 72 hours to complete my planned fertilizer application once the notice is filed. Beverly's eyes narrowed to slits. What exactly are you planning to apply? Organic livestock waste, standard agricultural practice for pasture maintenance. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of golf carts starting their morning rounds. Sterling cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps we should discuss settlement options. No settlement. Beverly's voice carried the finality of someone who'd passed the point of rational decision-making. If he wants to play games with property law, we'll play games with zoning enforcement, health department regulations, and every other bureaucratic tool available. As the legal delegation retreated toward their spotless SUV, I realized that Beverly had just escalated our conflict beyond the point of no return. She was betting everything on her ability to manipulate local government. I was betting on the law. Saturday morning couldn't come soon enough. Friday afternoon brought Beverly's final, desperate gambit. The emergency county commissioners' meeting was called for 4 p.m. in the courthouse conference room, a sterile space that smelled like industrial carpet and broken dreams. I arrived to find Beverly holding court with what appeared to be half the Oakwood Estates neighborhood, all clutching identical folders and wearing expressions of righteous indignation. Commissioner Wallace, a heavy-set man with the tired look of someone who'd been mediating neighbor disputes for too many years, called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. This emergency session has been requested to address agricultural easement concerns in the Cedar Heights area. Beverly stood up with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of personality. Commissioner, we're here today because Mr. Clayton Briggs is threatening to dump livestock waste on our community golf course under the pretense of agricultural rights. She gestured dramatically toward her folder-wielding supporters. These are 27 property owners who collectively represent over $12 million in real estate investment. We're not going to stand by while one individual destroys our property values through what amounts to biological terrorism. The phrase biological terrorism hung in the air like a bad smell. I watched several commissioners exchange glances that suggested they'd heard similar hyperbole from suburban residents before. Commissioner Rodriguez, a former rancher himself, leaned forward with interest. Mrs. Hartwell, what exactly are you asking this board to do? We want the 1963 agricultural easement declared null and void due to fundamental changes in land use character. The property is no longer agricultural. It's a recreational facility serving a residential community. Jake Morrison, sitting beside me, made a soft snorting sound that might have been suppressed laughter. The legal argument Beverly was making had about as much merit as a chocolate teapot. Commissioner Wallace called me to present my side. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I'd testified at exactly 3 government meetings in my entire life, and never with this much at stake. Commissioners, I've got 3 things to say. First, here's the original easement agreement from 1963. I held up the yellowed document. Second, here's the county clerk's certification that it's still valid and enforceable. Third, here's my agricultural activity notice properly filed and approved. I set the documents on the table with the deliberate care of someone playing winning cards. Agricultural easements in Texas don't expire because somebody builds a golf course on the property. State law is pretty clear about that. The knowledge nugget came from Commissioner Rodriguez, who'd clearly done his homework before the meeting. Mrs. Hartwell, I've reviewed the relevant statutes. Agricultural easements established before 1970 maintain perpetual validity under Texas Property Code Section 21.01.4. This board has no authority to invalidate them. The room erupted in angry murmurs from the Oakwood Estates contingent. Beverly's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a shade of red that matched her expensive handbag. Commissioner Rodriguez, Beverly said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Surely there must be some provision for protecting community investments from nuisance activities. Ma'am, spreading manure on agricultural land isn't a nuisance activity, it's farming. The mini twist came in Beverly's final, desperate overreach. She stood up and addressed the room with the theatrical intensity of someone making a last stand. Then we'll stop this through other means. I've contacted Channel 7 News about this situation. By tomorrow morning, every person in Texas will know that Cedar Heights County allows one man to terrorize an entire community with biological weapons. Commissioner Wallace's expression darkened. Mrs. Hartwell, you're talking about lawful agricultural activity protected by state statute. Calling it terrorism doesn't change the legal reality. Legal or not, it's wrong, And when Channel 7 shows footage of Mr. Briggs dumping cow manure on a golf course where children play, we'll see how long your legal technicalities hold up against public outrage. I felt a cold satisfaction as Beverly revealed her final strategy. She was betting that media pressure and public embarrassment would force me to back down, regardless of my legal rights. It was the same bullying tactic she'd used with the pool, escalated to countywide proportions. But Beverly had just made a crucial tactical error. By involving television news, she'd guaranteed that my agricultural activities would have witnesses, lots of them, professional witnesses with cameras and broadcast capabilities. The meeting ended with the commissioners unanimously declining to invalidate the easement. As the crowd filed out, Beverly cornered me near the courthouse steps. "Mr. Briggs, you have no idea what you're unleashing. When Channel 7 broadcasts footage of you destroying our golf course, every environmental group in the state will be calling for your head." I adjusted my hat with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Hartwell, environmental groups generally support organic farming practices over chemical-intensive golf course maintenance. You might want to research your talking points before you call the news." As Beverly stormed away toward her BMW, I realized she'd just handed me an unexpected gift. Media coverage would ensure that everyone in Texas knew exactly what happened when an HOA tried to bury a rancher's pool under 20 tons of sand. Saturday morning was going to be very interesting indeed. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear sky that television producers pray for. I was up at 5 a.m., but I wasn't alone. Channel 7's news van was already parked at the end of my driveway, camera crew setting up equipment with the eager efficiency of people about to witness something spectacular. Reporter Jessica Martinez approached with a microphone and the polished confidence of someone who'd covered everything from city council meetings to natural disasters. "Mr. Briggs, can you explain exactly what you're planning to do this morning?" "Standard agricultural practice," I replied, pulling on my work gloves. "Applying organic fertilizer to agricultural land as permitted under my 1963 easement rights." At exactly 7 a.m., the rumble of diesel engines announced the arrival of Tommy Rodriguez's convoy. 8 dump trucks loaded with fresh cow manure wound their way through Cedar Heights like a brown parade of agricultural justice. The smell hit the golf course before the trucks did. 40 tons of organic reality check that made golfers stop mid-swing and wrinkle their noses. Beverly Hartwell emerged from her house like a general surveying a battlefield, flanked by a growing crowd of Oakwood Estates residents. Many were still in bathrobes and pajamas, drawn from their Saturday morning routines by the unmistakable aroma of farm life. "This is insane," Beverly shouted, pointing at the trucks with theatrical outrage. "You can't just dump manure on a golf course." I consulted my easement papers with exaggerated care. "Actually, Mrs. Hartwell, I can dump organic fertilizer on agricultural land. It's specifically mentioned in the easement as an expected activity." The first truck backed up to the 18th green, the pristine putting surface visible from Beverly's bedroom window. The hydraulic whine of the lifting bed cut through the morning air like a mechanical bugle call. Then gravity took over. 40 tons of fresh cow manure cascaded onto the golf course in a brown waterfall of agricultural justice. The sound was indescribable, part landslide, part industrial accident, part poetic symphony. Steam rose from the fresh manure in the cool morning air, creating a visual effect that the news cameras captured in high-definition glory. Golfers abandoned their carts and fled toward the clubhouse, their bright polo shirts and pristine golf shoes no match for the overwhelming reality of livestock waste. One particularly unfortunate player, caught mid-putt when the first load hit, stood frozen with his putter raised as manure splattered across his white visor. Beverly charged toward me like an enraged bull, her face red with fury and her voice shrill with disbelief. "You maniac, do you have any idea what this is going to cost to clean up?" My mic drop moment arrived with the casual delivery of someone stating obvious facts. "Mrs. Hartwell, you dumped 20 tons of sand in my pool. I dumped 40 tons of manure on agricultural land with legal disposal rights. Math seems fair to me." The crowd of residents pressed closer, some shouting accusations, others recording everything on their phones. Commissioner Rodriguez, who'd driven out to witness the spectacle, stood beside the news crew with an expression of barely suppressed amusement. "This is vandalism," screamed Travis Kellerman, the golf course manager, as he watched his perfectly manicured greens disappear under mountains of brown organic matter. I pulled out my phone and showed the screen to the news camera. These are the agricultural easement documents properly filed with the county clerk. Organic fertilizer application is specifically protected under Texas state law. Vandalism would be, dumping construction sand in someone's swimming pool without legal authority. Beverly's final desperate gambit came as the 8th truck finished emptying its load. "I'm calling the sheriff. This has to be illegal." As if summoned by her words, Sheriff Martinez's patrol car pulled up to the golf course entrance. The sheriff stepped out, surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every possible variety of human foolishness, and walked over to me. "Morning, Clayton. Heard you might be having some agricultural activities this morning." "That's right, Sheriff. Routine fertilizer application on easement land." Sheriff Martinez examined the easement documents, then looked at the mountains of manure covering what used to be pristine fairways. Golf carts sat abandoned at crazy angles, their passengers having fled the aromatic assault. The clubhouse emptied as the smell reached even the air-conditioned interior. "Well," the sheriff said with the deadpan delivery of someone about to become a local legend, "looks like farming to me. Y'all have a good day." As the sheriff drove away, Beverly stood speechless for the first time since I'd known her. The golf course was closed indefinitely, the cleanup would take weeks, and every television in Texas would soon broadcast footage of what happened when suburban bullies picked a fight with agricultural rights. I looked at the news camera and delivered my final statement. Sometimes when people bury your peace, you gotta show them what fertilizer really looks like. The footage of 40 tons of cow manure cascading onto Oakwood Estates golf course went viral within hours. By Sunday evening, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times, shared on social media platforms from coast to coast, and turned me into an unexpected folk hero for anyone who'd ever been bullied by an HOA. The comments section read like a support group for suburban warriors. Finally, someone stood up to these property Nazis. And that's how you handle entitled neighbors. The agricultural community particularly loved the story. I received friend requests from ranchers in 43 states, all sharing their own HOA horror stories. Beverly Hartwell's media strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of portraying me as an environmental terrorist, the coverage painted me as a hard-working rancher defending my legal rights against suburban bullies. The visual of pristine golf carts abandoned in steaming manure became an instant meme representing rural versus urban conflicts across America. The financial aftermath was swift and decisive. Oakwood Estates golf course remained closed for 6 weeks while specialized crews cleaned and resodded the contaminated greens. The total cost reached $85,000, money that came directly from HOA dues and special assessments levied against every homeowner in the development. More importantly, the insurance company's investigation revealed Beverly's fraudulent health complaints and false county filings. Sterling and Associates quietly advised their client to settle out of court rather than face potential criminal charges for filing false government reports. The settlement conference took place in Jake Morrison's law office 3 weeks after what local newspapers had dubbed the Great Manure Offensive. Beverly sat stiffly in her chair, flanked by lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I wore my lucky boots and my grandfather's Stetson, relaxed as someone holding all the winning cards. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jake began, "my client is prepared to accept the following terms. Full restoration of his swimming pool, including upgraded filtration and lighting systems. $15,000 for the original pool damage, plus $8,000 in legal fees, plus a written apology to be published in the Cedar Heights newspaper." Beverly's attorney whispered urgently in her ear before she responded. "We'll accept the financial terms, but Mrs. Hartwell maintains she acted within her authority as HOA president." I leaned back in my chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd already won everything that mattered. "That's fine. The county prosecutor can decide whether filing fraudulent health complaints constitutes criminal behavior." The settlement was signed that afternoon. Beverly resigned as HOA president the following week and put her house on the market within a month. The new HOA board, chastened by their legal expenses and media embarrassment, sent me a formal letter acknowledging my agricultural easement rights and promising future cooperation with all legitimate farming activities. My pool was restored to better than original condition by Labor Day. Sarah spent the entire weekend floating in the crystal clear water, finally relaxed enough to talk about transferring to Texas A&M's agricultural program. The sound of the rebuilt waterfall mixed with her laughter as she told friends the story of how her dad had defended their swimming pool with agricultural justice. But the real victory came in the community benefit that emerged from the conflict. I used my newfound media attention to launch the Cedar Heights Agricultural Education Fund, teaching suburban residents about farming practices, water conservation, and rural-urban cooperation. Mrs. Juliet donated her late husband's surveying equipment to create a resource center for property rights research. The golf course reopened in October with a new management philosophy emphasizing environmental sustainability and community cooperation. They even installed educational signs explaining the agricultural heritage of the land and the importance of easement rights in Texas property law. 6 months later, I received a letter from a rancher in Montana facing similar HOA problems. Then another from Oklahoma. Soon I was consulting with rural property owners across the country, sharing the legal strategies that had helped me defend my rights against suburban encroachment. The knowledge nugget that emerged from my experience became agricultural legend. Never let bureaucratic bullies bury your peace without showing them what real fertilizer looks like. So that's the story of how 20 tons of sand in a swimming pool led to 40 tons of manure on a golf course and created a national movement for agricultural property rights.
So Clayton Briggs just taught Beverly how to wear the most expensive lesson in Texas property law, 40 tons worth, but here's what really matters about this story. Clayton didn't win because he had the biggest pile of manure. He won because he did his homework. While Beverly was busy playing political games and filing fake complaints, Clayton was quietly learning the law. That 1953 easement document wasn't just on paper. It was proof that knowing your rights beats having connections every single time. See, Beverly made the classic HOA mistake. She thought volume and intimidation could override legal reality. But the law doesn't care how many angry neighbors you rally, or how expensive your lawyers are. How many of you have gotten those threatening HOA letters about your fence, your mailbox, or your garden? I bet most of you just paid the fine without checking if they actually had the authority to collect it. Here's my question. What ridiculous HOA rule you have been forced to follow? Drop it in the comment. I love hearing these stories. If you enjoy watching suburban bullies get their comeuppance,